I'm going to be glancing down at my laptop because I want to make sure I get this right for you. So, stage one or level one is the baseline, no cognitive impairment whatsoever. The next is number two, and that's where someone would feel that they have a problem themselves. People around them wouldn't necessarily notice it. So, that's really the subjective part, and that is called very mild cognitive decline or age-associated memory impairment. So that's described as subjective complaints of memory deficit, most frequently in areas of forgetting where you've placed your keys, forgetting names of people that you've known for years. Um, and again, on clinical interview, we just can't come up with anything. So this would be what's considered normal age related. And that there's a lot of confusion about that too, because a lot of times people panic when they lose their keys and go, oh my God, is it a sign? No, not necessarily. It's a sign of normal aging. The problem we usually say is if you've lost your keys, you stumble across them and you're not sure what the keys are for. That's a problem. So now moving into level three, that is mild cognitive decline or mild cognitive impairment. And that is actually a diagnosis, mild cognitive impairment. So a very high percentage of people who have a diagnosis of mild cognitive impairment will go on to develop Alzheimer's disease. Not always, but it's typically seen as a precursor. People with mild cognitive impairment, or here in this stage three, are typically very high functioning. So they are able to live independently, often with a great support person. So if they have, say, neighbors who check in on them, use sticky notes, have a calendar system, and they're able to do things like navigate a city bus system. They're able to understand, like, okay, the cabinets are looking kind of like I'm at Mother Hubbard's, so I need to go to the store. I need to buy some items to cook later. So they understand a need, they know what to do about it, they're able to plan. And one of the things that I've mentioned before is about that loss of executive function. And that executive function is what allows us to do things called instrumental activities of daily living, such as planning transportation, planning for meals, anything really that has to do with planning, going shopping, preparing meals, doing housekeeping, laundry, managing finances, managing medications, using a telephone, using a remote control. Those things are all instrumental activities of daily living. They require reason, logic, the ability to problem solve, to plan, and to execute a plan. And those abilities are grouped under um, executive function. And I wrote a blog post about that, I think it was around July 4th, which was called Dementia and Loss of Independence. And you can find that on my website at dementiasherpa.com. And just go into the blog section and you'll find that there if you want more details about executive function and the types of things that people are typically able to do, and where they might start losing ability. Inside that blog is an embedded link for the Lawton IADL scale, and that helps you figure out where your loved one is as far as their ability to do those types of things. So that's really a good indicator. Usually we're thinking about a memory test in a doctor's office to figure out if there's a problem. I highly recommend the Lawton scale because this is practical day-to-day life. Either these things are they're able to do with no problem, or they're struggling with them. And if they're struggling with them, there's definitely a problem, right? So that's just another tool to add to your resource list and something that you can easily do on your own, which is probably a good time for me to remind you. If you have any questions, please reach out to me. That's what I'm here for. I am your Dementia Sherpa, guiding you through rough terrain. So you can go to dementiasherpa.com and there's contact information there, or you can private message me on Facebook. It's facebook.com/Dementia Sherpa, or Twitter. Email me, any of those things. I am happy to connect with you and answer any questions you may have. Okay, that's level 3. Number 4 is moderate cognitive decline, or mild dementia. And this is really where most of us know there's a problem. And depending on what state you live in or what medical system you're in, there can be an even bigger problem in the sense that your loved one isn't able to function without help. And depending on, let's say, California, for example, Medicaid does not pay for skilled nursing, or excuse me, does not pay for assisted living. It pays for skilled nursing. Nobody freak out. But it doesn't pay for assisted living. And people at this stage would typically do well in assisted living or memory care, but those communities only accept private payments. So this is like this giant gaping canyon of where people need help, but if Medicaid is their payment source, they're not able to get the help they need because of how that works in that particular state. So in the United States, Medicaid rules vary from state to state. I'm in Oregon, it's completely different than California. So always check into what actually is happening in your own state. And I digress. Back to level 4. So this is where there's a very clear-cut deficit. If someone like me is doing an assessment, I know that there's an issue. And typically what family will say to me at this point is, you probably won't be able to tell, but there's a problem. And any professional is easily able to tell, even before starting a careful clinical interview. We're easily able to tell that there's an issue. But what happens a lot for family members at this point in the disease process is they have other people around them. This is where that family member who's not quite on board, this is usually at that stage. Where they're able to come up with reasons that they think, oh, it's not really dementia, it's something else. And typically it's not. So here's what it looks like at that stage, that level 4 of mild dementia. So there's going to be a difficulty if you're talking about current events, for example. If at this point, who doesn't know who Donald Trump is? If somebody is struggling with that, there's a problem, right? And, when I'm doing an assessment, somebody doesn't necessarily have to say Trump to me, right? But I ask something like, so, what have you been following in the news lately? Or I haven't had a chance to see a paper or watch the news lately. What are the top stories? So somebody could say the Olympics, right? Or presidential campaign, or there's that guy on TV, or lots of different ways to describe it, and that's okay. That would tell me there's some word finding difficulty maybe, or not exactly focused on the details, but they have a general sense of what's going on. So there's kind of a scale within that where you can score people, but this lets me know they're not quite where they used to be, especially if it was somebody who was really avidly into politics or prided themselves on staying up with the news. Then okay, things are not going the way that they should be going. So there's that. There's also some problems with recalling one's own personal history. So getting kind of mixed up on the timeline or conflating. So I was born in California, but I originally moved to Oregon in 1994. So that's my personal history. But if I was confused or mixed up or in this stage, I might get confused about where I was born or where I moved in 1994, those types of things. Concentration is a problem. So in a clinical interview, there's going to be questions about, count backwards from 100, or yeah, from 100 by sevens, or from 40 by fours, or from 20 by twos. And like if I'm doing an assessment, I'm not going to do that because that's just weird, right? I don't come into your home and say, can you please count backwards from 100? No, but you can easily tell other ways that people are struggling with concentrating on what's actually the topic at hand, right? If their mind is wandering and they're just not hanging with you in the conversation. Also, this is where you see all of those IADLs, those instrumental activities of daily living, where people are just not able to do that unsupported. So they aren't able to get to the grocery store, either because they don't recognize that that's the solution to not having enough food in the house, or they can't figure out how to get there, or they get lost going there, or maybe they do make it to the grocery store, but they buy 3 cases of tuna and nothing else, right? And it's not a money issue. It's not a love of tuna issue necessarily. It's just that's kind of where their brain is guiding them at this particular moment. So all of these things just aren't quite appropriate. Somebody might easily be able to answer the phone. In fact, I would imagine absolutely able to answer the phone when it rings. That cues, oh, need to answer the phone. That doesn't mean that they're able to place a call, though. They would be struggling with that, like figuring out, where do I find that phone number? How do I work this thing? And they might have a completely different experience if they had a rotary phone growing up and they still have a rotary phone, right? But phones look a lot different and they work differently than they used to. So somebody would have noticeable struggles in all of those IADL areas. And this is the part usually that drives families up a tree. This is where denial starts really becoming more apparent. And so the person who is definitely showing signs of cognitive impairment is saying, I'm fine, you have the problem. And I've talked about this a lot. This is where we have to be very careful because we can lose all our credibility when we are insisting that there's a problem and our loved one is saying, I don't know what you're talking about. And so that's due to an additional condition called anosognosia. And what that means is their brain is telling them everything is a-okay. And you, who are saying there's a problem with you. You're losing your credibility. You keep insisting there's a problem, and my brain is telling me there's not a problem, so you must be the problem, right? That's what's happening at this stage. And people will tend to withdraw more. So let's say somebody who has enjoyed going to church for years, right? This has been a big part of her life. She won't want to do that anymore. And it's not because suddenly she's lost her faith. It's because it's a social situation that has become increasingly awkward. She's just not exactly sure how to manage it anymore. She sees people that she's known for years and doesn't remember their names, or doesn't remember the conversation she had with them last week, right? Or initially just may go completely blank and not even recognize their face. So this is why denial comes up, and the withdrawal from social situations. So on the one hand, the brain's saying, no, everything's fine. And then there's empirical evidence that everything's not fine, and it's super confusing, right? When your brain is giving you mixed signals. So that's stage 4. In the next video, I'll go over stages 5, 6, and 7.